Good day today. Hey, listen, today we're going to be very single-minded in terms of what we talk about. We are going to be talking about the moves that the Fed made today and how it is going to have an impact on both mortgage loan officers and real estate agents. I think there's a lot of stuff here that we don't know is going to happen for sure. I think there is some stuff that we do know is going to happen. But most importantly, I think there's a lot of stuff that is unforeseen. I think we're in uncharted territories right now. I truly believe that to be the case. The move that the Fed made today is something that we have, quite simply, I just don't think we've seen it before. The last big recession, the '08 recession, the largest recession since the Great Depression, where the United States housing market, and I'm proud to say I participated with this, brought the global economy to its knees and on the brink of collapse. Though we're not necessarily doing that right now, bringing the global economy to the brink of collapse. It all has to start somewhere, doesn't it? Kind of like the butterfly turning into the hurricane in the eastern shores of Florida. But I digress. Hey, listen, if you're watching for the first time, nice to meet you. I'm Brian. Hope to see more of you. If you watch with any regularity, thanks for coming back. Absolutely appreciate it. And if you want to help us out or help me out, the best thing that you can do is go ahead and hit that share button and keep the conversation and the dialogue going, because mark my words, this is not going to end today. Not by any stretch of the imagination. So we have a couple of graphics that we want to share with you. We're not going to tackle this topic, but I did print some stuff up that I thought was of importance in terms of what we're talking about today. And then we want to talk about what the Fed said they were going to do. So, all right, well, if you're not a mortgage loan officer, congratulations. You probably had a better day than the loan officer that you're working with. We saw some pretty significant shifts over in pricing. And frankly, the Fed did exactly what I said they were not going to do yesterday. I said yesterday that the Fed would not lower their balance sheet with any significance. Now, I said this because it seems to me that it would be a certain form of economic suicide. Though I don't know, I don't understand microeconomics on the same level as all these brilliant people who've done a swimmingly fantastic job over the past few decades. But I certainly have my opinions on this. Now, I think one of the motivations for the Fed going out and saying that they're going to aggressively drop their balance sheet is because of the nature of where the balance sheet is right now. So let's kind of look at that right now. Hold on a second here. Okay. So Lael Brainard, that is the Fed governor, said today, that we're on top of stuff. This is today, that the central bank could start reducing its balance sheet as soon as May and would be doing so at a rapid pace. The operative term here is the rapid pace. Keep in mind that the Fed understands that every economist, every prognosticator, and every investor is going to sit and stew on every word that the Fed says. So everything that is said is by design. So when they say a rapid pace, that is designed to let investors know that things are going to happen, and they could probably be happening a little bit more assertively than they had previously thought. That was the first one. The second point that the Fed made today was she also indicated that rates are going to go up more aggressively than the typical quarter percentage point increment that we've seen before. The Fed said at the FOMC meeting, I think it was a couple times ago, that over the next 6 meetings, we're going to see increases. So assuming that we see a quarter increase, you're looking at a 1.5 increase over where we began this whole thing on the Fed's short-term rates. So we can assume that we're going to see maybe 3/8 or a half, maybe one or more times. But what we're going to see is something that is more aggressive than the aggressive and assertive pace. And I love the very in-your-face choice of terms here, aggressive pace. It's going to be more aggressive than the aggressive pace that the Fed's already said that they're going to set. And so these are the 2 points that the Fed made. Now, why is the Fed making these points? Well, it's quite simply is because inflation. Inflation is the big one right now. And just a couple of days ago, the Fed Governor Lael Brainard, she penned a paper discussing the issues and the complications of inflation and the reason why we're going to be doing this. The first things that she states, and by the way, excuse me if this is going to be a little technical and a little boring, but I think this is really important to understanding what we do for a living as real estate agents and lenders. But Brainard, she penned this before she came out saying we're going to reduce the balance sheet, and I want to show you the balance sheet and explain the balance sheet to you, and that'll start to make sense why she made her moves. But more importantly, what the ramifications are, and most importantly, what we can individually and collectively do about it. But just to give you a little bit of the back history of this, based on what she wrote on April, what's the date today, guys?
Today's the 5th.
Oh, she put this out today too. What do you know? April 5th. So she came out and said, well, Paul Volcker noted that the dual mandates isn't an either-or position, and that runaway inflation would be the greatest threat to the continuing growth of our economy and ultimately to employment. So she's coming out and talking about Volcker, one of the past Fed board governors, and saying, well, he said this over 40 years ago, that inflation is going to be the thing that's going to hinder our economy, and ultimately it's going to hurt employment. I just, by the way, on a side note, I did notice employment figures across every state, and I think there's like 6 states that have seen positive employment growth from the point prior to the 2020 recession when COVID hit us. But the vast majority of states are still underemployed from where we were pre-COVID. And so employment is an issue. Just because you're not working doesn't mean that you're not affecting our economy. Just because you're not joining the workforce and some of our employment numbers look good, when we look at our overall employment as a country, we are still decidedly below collectively on a state-by-state basis where we were prior to COVID. And that's not a good thing. And what she's coming out and saying is, hey, with inflation running away as it is right now, it's ultimately going to hurt employment over here as well. She says maximum employment and stable low inflation benefits all Americans, but in particularly important, this is what Dave Stevens was talking about, for low and moderate income families. The combination of good job opportunities and stable low inflation provides purchase power to fill up gas tanks and grocery carts and pay housing and medical costs, leaving room to build emergency cushions and invest in education, retirement. And for some small businesses, indeed, the Employment Act of 1946 calling the federal government to promote, maximize employment, production, and purchasing power. So she's saying that it is her congressional mandate from 1946 to go out and make some of the moves she's making. There's no doubt that she pinned this whole thing because the moves that she's making right now are going to be deemed to be somewhat unpopular. And that's kind of the road that I'm going to go down on this. So her point is that she says, well, it's going to hurt low and middle class folks, as we discussed before. And she says the areas that inflation hurts us the most is going to be food, which is essential, and gas, which is essential. It's what powers our country, gas. I mean, it just does, like it or not. And it's how we survive, which is food. The 2 most essential things I think you can think of is what's going to hit us the most. Who's it going to hit the most? It's going to hit the underserved communities. Now, here's the deal. So she wants to reduce her balance sheet. Now, I want to show this to you. This is the Fed balance sheet that you guys are looking at right now. Now, this goes from 2003 up until today. Okay, now if we were to extend this out, and we can, by the way, you can find this if you look up FRED, F-R-E-D, it's the St. Louis Federal Reserve. And this is one of the pieces of information that they provide in real time. And these are interactive graphs that you can use, so you can spread them over a longer or shorter period of time. But here's the point. If we were to look at the Fed's balance sheet and we were to extend this out all the way back to the 1970s or even earlier than that, the balance sheet would go lower than it is right here. So on our left-hand side, what you're looking at, you probably can't see my cursor, but if your eyes scroll over to the left-hand side, you'll see that the balance sheet was really low. The Fed essentially, for the past 60, 70 years, has not really kept a balance sheet. It's been very marginal. It's been, hovering, easy for me to say, under $1 billion. But that's essentially what they've been doing. Now, you see that on the left-hand side, you see that vertical bar, that big vertical bar there, the gray bar. That was a 2007, late 8, 9, 10 housing recession that we had. That was one of the bigger recessions we've had, the biggest recession since the Great Depression. Now, you'll notice what happened when we look inside that gray bar. We look at the blue line in the gray bar on our graph there, and you'll see that the balance sheet goes up. And it goes up significantly, doesn't it? We go from basically a flat line to a side of the Eiffel Tower. Now, I'm just talking about the thicker of the 2 gray vertical bars on the left-hand side. What that is the Fed buying treasuries, and that's the Fed buying mortgage-backed securities. In short, When we look at that as part of the Fed's balance sheet, those are actually viewed to be assets. Those are not liabilities. Those are deemed to be assets. But keep in mind, this is all funny money, as the Fed can go ahead and print and create money where it simply didn't exist before. When the Fed's out there creating money, what they're doing is they're adding money into our economy when they create money. And when they do that, what they do is they compromise the value of every other dollar that had previously been printed. Okay? So in essence, the Fed's balance sheet is similar to any other balance sheet, since anything for which the Fed has to pay money becomes the Fed's asset. In other words, if the Fed were to hypothetically buy bonds or stocks by paying newly issued money for it, those investments become assets. So what does the Fed do when they're printing or when they're buying treasuries and when they're buying mortgage-backed securities? What are they doing? Well, they're not paying for it with deposits that they have. The Fed is actually creating money where it didn't exist. So when you hear about the Fed buying $30 trillion in mortgage-backed securities on a monthly basis, what the Fed is essentially doing is adding $30 trillion into circulation in our economy. That $30 trillion is going to do what? That's right, dilute every other dollar that had previously been printed. The more dollars that you print, the less value each dollar has that had previously been printed. When a dollar is worth less today than it was yesterday, that's inflation. That means I need to collect more dollars in order to buy the same item yesterday, because that is going to cost more today because each dollar is worth less. That's the idea. So the Fed, by trying to reduce their balance sheet, is trying to take money out of the economy and make every dollar worth a little bit more. Got it? That's the thinking. In fact, when I told you that the Fed board chief said she was also going to raise interest rates more aggressively than what we had known, more aggressively than the quarter point raise on each one of their FOMC meetings, it's going to have the same type of effect of reducing circulation, reducing money, and creating more value in every individual dollar. Worth pointing out what I saw the other day. I don't know if you know this, if you were on my live yesterday or the day before, but I read that the Central Bank of Russia raised their short-term rate to 20%. And now the ruble's actually worth something. Okay, so Fed assets are when they buy something, they go ahead and create money and they purchase that asset. It pays them money, so it becomes an asset on their balance sheet. It's not a liability, it's an asset. So examples of this are Treasury Securities. Traditionally, the Fed's assets have mainly consisted of government securities such as U.S. Treasuries and other debt investment. More than 60% of the nearly $5 trillion of the $7.69 trillion in assets include various types of U.S. Treasuries, and this is as of March 17th, 2021. In case you didn't catch that, part of the balance sheet for the Fed right now, which I just showed you a moment ago, if we look over on this side over here, and we looked at the very edge there, that is where we're at today. That balance right there is $7.69 trillion. So when we go that way, and we're almost flatlined, we're in the billions. When we go that way, we're at $7.69 trillion. That's a pretty extraordinary amount of funny money that's been created that didn't exist prior to the Fed running this up in around 2006 and 7. And keep in mind, when they started running this shit up in 2008, right in the middle of that vertical bar on your left-hand side, when we start climbing up, you'll notice that even when we weren't in a recession in part because the Fed kept buying mortgage-backed securities and treasuries and introducing money into the United States economy, diluting every pre-existing dollar. And now it's kind of like, if you've ever been on a good bender and you just drank a shit ton of booze for a few days, and then like on day 4, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to have a hangover. Or I can just have a hair of the dog and keep this party going for another day. You can certainly keep drinking and keep having a hair of the dog, but eventually you're going to have to pay the piper, stop drinking, and deal with a hangover. Right now, what a great analogy, Brian. You must be a raging alcoholic. Right now, what the Fed is doing is they're saying it's time to bite the bullet and deal with a hangover. And we've been kicking this can down the road for such a long period of time, to the tune of $7.69 trillion. Eventually, you have to reconcile the books. And because of the runaway inflation that we're seeing right now, the Fed's saying, you know what? If it's going to be bad, let's just get this crap out of the way right now. That's how I think she's looking at this. Now, why do I say that? Well, because it's hard for us to really understand or to quantify exactly how much $1 trillion is versus $1 billion. When we listen to all of our policymakers, you hear billions, billions, billions here, billions there. But then recently you start hearing trillions, trillions, trillions. So I want to explain to you, and I know I've talked about this before, but it's worth looking at the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. A million seconds equals 11 and a half days. A billion seconds equals 31.34 years, 31 and 3/4 years. It's a big difference. But a trillion seconds is 37,710 years. So I think it becomes very easy for us to say, a billion, a trillion, what's the difference? Night and effing day is the difference. Night and effing day is the difference. I remember a number of years ago, I was looking at this stuff, and I think there was only, at one point, there was only like $26 trillion in global currencies in the entire world. That means that the Fed is holding a quarter of all the world's currencies value on its books right now. And keep in mind, I understand this is funny money. No one's out there printing $7 trillion. What they're doing is adding zeros to spreadsheets, and they're moving them over into other, they're putting them over onto the balance sheet of other depository institutions that we have around the country. We know this. Nevertheless, it still is having a massive and catastrophic effect. So I think what we're seeing right now is the Fed going out there and saying the $7 trillion, something needs to happen with it. Now, here's the problem, as we discussed yesterday. When we start to reduce our balance sheet, that means interest rates are going to go up. We're pulling money out of the economy. We're raising short-term rates more aggressively than what was already deemed to be aggressive. What is double aggressive called? Rabid. Ravenous. I'm aggressive. Well, yeah, I'm double aggressive. And that's what they are. The Fed's being double aggressive right now. So what this is going to do is this is going to raise interest on everything. That means, okay, we're going to make a dollar worth more, but in order to borrow that dollar, it's going to cost you more, which seems a little counterintuitive. The idea is if a dollar is worth less, then you're going to raise rates so that that dollar has a higher return on investment for that person who's going to be lending you the dollar, which I suppose is kind of what we're doing. Anyways, so it's going to make interest rates go up. Is it going to make interest rates go up on what? Well, the answer is it's going to make interest rates go up on everything. It's going to make your credit card, what you're paying on your credit cards go up. It's going to be financing a car, which is already super expensive because they're not importing them anymore, but it's going to make car loans more expensive. It's going to make mortgages more expensive. But any type of revolving and or adjustable debt that somebody is paying on, that's all going to be increasing across the board. So, which is also going to take not only the Fed's money out of circulation, but it's probably going to take a lot of our collective consumers' money out of circulation too. We're going to be a little tighter to the vest if we have less money or if it's not going as far and we have to pay more to borrow somebody else's money. I always like spending somebody else's money more than mine, don't you? Even with a promissory note, as we know now, it just doesn't matter anymore. Okay, so where's the silver lining in this for loan officers? Well, the silver lining is really clear. Is if you, again, listen, you got to find your opportunities where you can. As the old saying goes, even a pig in a pen of shit can find a kernel of corn every now and then. And that's what we're doing, my friends. Okay, so where's the silver lining? Well, if somebody is borrowing somebody else's money and it's revolving debt, and they're holding that on their own personal balance sheet, now would be a great time to go ahead and refinance that debt. Go ahead and refinance it with cash out refinances. I mean it too. Well, hold on a second, Brian. I'm going from a 3.5 to 4.5 to maybe a 5%, 5.5% interest rate. That's right. But if you're paying 27% interest on that revolving debt that you have, and depending on how much you're holding of it, it would still probably behoove you to do this. I did an interview with Barry Habib a couple of days last week, and he said, "Listen, I think he's been so far. He's been right on this stuff. Like, if you want, like anybody out there, and I have been reading this crap all day long, printing this stuff all day long, and from everybody I can see, I think he's probably been about as right as anybody out there, more so than anybody out there. But if I'm looking at cash out debt consolidation refinances right now, as a result of what we're seeing right now with all forms of interest going up, and we're going to be looking at these cash out debt consolidation refinances to go ahead and free up money for folks. Jack the rate and eat the fees. Jack the rate and eat the fees. Because what we're going to see is eventually we're going to come out of a recession. And the way that we come out of recessions that we've seen every time has been by lowering interest rates. Which brings me to a very interesting point here, guys. And I'm going to pull up this graph one more time here, okay? Okay. So, when we look at the recession on the left, the wider vertical gray, balance sheet, pretty low. Right in the middle of it, to get us out of the recession, what does the Fed do? They increase their balance sheet. They add money to their they add money to the economy by adding assets to their balance sheet in the form of treasuries and MBSs. We know this. Okay, they continue kind of buying, but not at a rapid pace. Then on the right-hand side, that very thin one, that's our COVID shutdown. How did the Fed keep us out of that? A longer, protracted recession. How did they do it? They added to their balance sheet. Look at how much they added to their balance sheet in 2020. Look at that. And here's the whole thing. We wonder, it's like, well, wait a minute. We scuttled everybody going to work for months and months. We shut down international and global commerce, and yet we were having just a raging good time. Well, one, the Fed was just giving you money for the United States Treasury, courtesy of the federal government, was giving you money just to exist. And the other one is the Fed went on this extraordinary purchasing program, didn't they? You know, this form of quantitative easing. Look at how crazy that was on the right-hand side. For the entire Great Recession, look at how much it affected the balance sheet on your left-hand side. That's the Great Recession. What we did for the short 2020-2021 recession to the balance sheet of the Fed was twice, almost 3 times as much money into circulation by putting assets on the Fed's balance sheet as we did during the entire Great Recession. That's insane. You know, it's like what I said yesterday. It's, you know, when you look at a pool and a pool is, you know, blue and it's beautiful, it's turquoise, and man, it looks great. And then you check the chemicals, and the chemicals are out of whack. You know that pool's going to be turning green, you know, in the next couple of days. I said our economy was the same way. Well, how could you say that? Well, all we have to do is look at this graph. Look at the extraordinary amount of money that we added into the economy during these into the economy by adding assets to the Fed's balance sheet. Now, here's the thing. We're not in a recession yet, are we? This is the part I don't get. We're not in a recession right now. Everyone knows we're going into a recession. Like, everybody's on the same page. What are we doing to the balance sheet right now? Well, we know when we're in a recession, we add to the balance sheet. Yet what we're doing is we are going to aggressively reduce the balance sheet heading into a recession. Is that not then going to be basically putting out a house fire with a hose full of gasoline? Because we're doing what is counterintuitive to coming out of every recession that we've had in the past. We haven't even gotten into this one, and the Fed's all but guaranteeing that this recession is going to be much more complicated and difficult than any recession that we've had in the past. Because by doing those things, we're going to ensure that interest rates are going to go higher. But here's the good part. The quicker we go into this recession, the quicker we get out of it. Like any business organization, the Fed maintains a balance sheet listing its assets and its liabilities. The Fed's assets include various treasuries, as we talked about, mortgage-backed securities, which we talked about, purchased in the open market, and loans made to banks. Those are assets because they're paying money. They're doing it by printing fake money up. Liabilities for the Feds include currency in circulation and bank reserves held at commercial banks. Isn't that interesting? A liability for the Fed is exactly where we stand right now, having way too much currency in circulation right now. Massive amounts of currency. Remember the difference between $1 million, $1 billion, and $1 trillion? We've added 2004, let's see, in 18 years, we've added $7 trillion into the economy. $7 trillion, million, billion, trillion people, $7 trillion into the economy to prop it up over nearly the past 2 decades. Again, you can keep drinking, but eventually you're going to have to deal with a hangover, and we're going to have to deal with it right now. It's very interesting to see how deep this recession is going to go. During an economic crisis, the Fed can expand its balance sheet by buying more assets, such as bonds. We call this quantitative easing. That's why I find this fascinating. We are going down the opposite road of quantitative easing. We are going anti-quantitative easing. Okay. So what does this mean? Well, as far as I can, by the way, if anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them with some of the stuff that I'm looking at here. I just want to give you guys an idea of where we're at, why we're here, and why I find this so remarkably complicated. It is turning left when I think we're turning right. It's going up when I think we're going down right now. I get why they're doing it. Like I said, the reason why I think they're doing it is they're looking at $7 trillion and saying this is way too much. We need to find a way to reduce it. Their timing is really kind of impeccable and incredible. You know, the other thing is to think about here are some of the black swans, right? You know, a black swan is that thing that is unforeseeable in any negotiation or situation that comes out of the blue. You know, like you're trying to buy a house and all of a sudden Aunt Edna, who you had no idea was ever alive, actually died and left you an inheritance. Oh shit, didn't know I had an Aunt Edna, didn't know I had an inheritance. That would be a black swan. So what are some of the black swans that are some of the unforeseeable things that we have in front of us right now? You know, what about COVID? Is there going to be another more vicious, you know, variant that's going to come along that's going to lead to masks and shutdowns again? That would be like another variant. This whole thing going on right now in the Ukraine, is it going to escalate beyond borders? Is it going to, you know, lead to a shutdown in you know, global commerce? I mean, these could be issues that would go ahead and keep perpetuating inflation. But see, right now, here's what you guys need to know. The Fed is taking unprecedented, drastic measures right now. Unprecedented. It was a trip today when she came out and what she said and how assertively and clearly she said how forcefully she's going to do what she's going to do. That caught me completely off guard. Here's the thing. That tells me that the Fed is looking at the road that we're on with inflation right now, with the potential for this recession to be a real bugaboo, and said, I am going to buck tradition, I'm going to buck the status quo, and I'm going to have a little bit of tough love with the American economy. And that tough love is going to hit a lot of areas that are unforeseen. Trippy, if you think about it this way, guys, just a couple of days ago, think about this. Just a couple of days ago, we were talking about how the Dallas Fed came out with a paper that said, you know, this is a housing bubble. It's like, you're out of your mind. There's no way this is a housing bubble. All the stats and all the analytics, you know, we had a 2.5 million property shortage in 2018 that we were trying to rectify. Now it's 2.5 million shortage of properties in 2018. Now we're at 3.8 million shortage in properties. In fact, our housing inventory has gotten decidedly worse over the past 4 years. It hasn't gotten any better, which means our heavy amount of demand that we have, this guarantees that prices on properties are going to stay high. We still have, we don't have tariffs in place, but we have a hard time right now with global commerce to get our sheetrock into this country, to get framing wood into this country, and also to get qualified labor to go ahead and build the houses that we need to keep up with demand. We simply don't have that. Since we don't have that and we have a higher demand than we have supply at this point, yeah, that tells me that there's no way that we're in a housing bubble. Even if the economy kind of goes to hell for a while, we're not going to be, even if inflation continues to outclip anything that we can imagine right now, even if rates were to go up to 6 or 7%, we're not in a housing bubble, because the book of business that all these loans are written on are not the 228s and the 327s, as we did in 2005, 6, and 7. You know, the ones that had a 3-year fixed rate period, and a 3-year prepayment penalty and a 2-year fixed rate period, something that was guaranteed to blow up in year 3. None of that. We're talking average credit scores above 700. I mean, every single metric that we're looking at in housing tells me there is no way in hell No way in hell that we're in a housing bubble right now. And still right now, I sit here and firmly tell you entrenched that we're not in a housing bubble. Yet the Dallas Treasury or the Dallas Fed came out and said we are in a housing bubble right now, and gave some half-baked reasons for it. But after looking at what the Fed did today, with these drastic moves they've made, these unprecedented historic moves that the Fed board made today, it makes me think, well, maybe they're a little bit more concerned, and there's things at play right now that we simply can't see, because we are doing the exact opposite of what we have traditionally and historically done. So anyways, that's what happened today. The Fed came out and caught everybody off guard, and rates went through the roof. And if their words are followed by their actions, I think we can, in the short term, expect interest rates to get higher. So look at those cash out refinances, because credit for everything is going to go higher. Those debt consolidation cash out refinances. And I'll tell you right now, guys, lock them today. I would if I were you. I would quote my rate today, and I would tell my client, go ahead and shop me, but I guarantee you the rate today, you might think it's high, it's going to be a bargain by tomorrow. And the more you shop, the higher it gets, and I don't give a shit what my competition says. They might be trying to bait and switch you, but when it comes time to lock that loan, I don't want you to sit back and say, man, I wish I would have went with Brian because he was the only one who's shooting straight with me. Have these conversations with your clients right now, guys. Be very clear, be very directed. Don't be forceful, but be firm, and let them know why. Because rates right now, and all you have to do is, it's a Google away to see exactly what's going on. Put Fed board reduces balance sheet, raises interest rates, and you will find 10 billion results on this stuff. Share this with your clients. Lock your loans. Be safe right now. Don't get caught with your pants around your ankles. With that said, guys, I hope this was helpful today. If anyone has any questions or comments, reach out to me at 707-330-1272. And send me a text message. Anyone you want me to interview, we can certainly go ahead and hunt some of that stuff down. I've got a couple more great interviews for the National Real Estate Post coming up. That's the nationalrealestatepost.com. Check it out. I do a show every day, and they're about 5 to 7 minutes trying to give you what's going on in the market with a little sales nourishment and hopefully put a smile on your face. With that said, my friends, I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for jumping on, and make sure you hit that share button because, come on,